Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SCA 2024. I am Shellyan Edwards Barron, your creative writing specialist, here to help you get through the next few weeks. So, I know that we're coming down to the end, it is crunch time, and that is going to create some anxiety. Yep. I know it's going to be stepping in, and you're wondering if you're doing enough, and all the negative thoughts, and you're thinking, things aren't going well. But here's what: the best way to be prepared is to be prepared. So that is what we're working on. And that's why I'm here to help you calm the nerves a little bit and work on the things that you can work on, which would be the creative writing with reports and narratives. And we're also looking at a little bit of comprehension to help you navigate that as well. So we're pretty much covering the comprehension section of the ELA as well as the creative writing section. So we're not really touching on the grammar and the spelling, but I know if you want to work on those as well, if grammar, spelling, and punctuation are challenges for you, my recommendation is if you're not already in SEA, the Peacefield approach, please join. If you are, check through the files section and do a search in the group for information on grammar and spelling and so on. And I guarantee you, you will get a little bit of information that will help you work on what you're working on. So this week we're continuing with a few topics that I know are, I guess, pretty high on the list in terms of challenges. And so hopefully we're going to be able to um, answer the questions that you have, give you the strategies that you need. So please, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to let me know, and just type in the chat wherever you are, and the message will come up, so I'd be able to answer the questions particularly. So what are the topics for today? Let me just double check and read them out so that you know exactly what we're working on. All right, so we're starting with reports as always. And this week we're focusing on paragraphs 4 and 5, which pretty much would be how to conclude a report effectively. In the narratives, we're working on story transitions and paragraphing, which would be how you move your story forward. And for the comprehension, let's see, what is this? Okay, we're reviewing nonfiction passages and graphics. So we're looking at a couple of strategies that you can work on for those, right? And so that's what we're covering this week. It's If you don't have a copy of the schedule, please get a copy of the schedule so you would know what's coming up next and what you can be working on each week. And what am I looking for? Right. Um, so that what we're doing is I would be sharing with you some little tips and things that I picked up while I'm working with my own students, challenges that I see that they're facing, and I'll be giving you a few ideas about how you can navigate those challenges and what you can do this week to really reinforce the creative writing. And so you're working on both narratives and reports each week, as well as some comprehension. So you do need to set aside some time to work on these things. Now, before I get into all of that, um, I want to mention something about reports. So we're starting with reports. Um, the issue of, you know what, let me just bring it up. The issue of writing reports in first person or third person, I know some people are still having challenges with that. And so I wanted to just address that before we get into the paragraphs 4 and 5. Now, what's happening is that reducing the use of pronouns is really supposed to be one of the major things that you work on. And so, because of that, using first person pronouns is always an issue, and we want to minimize the use of that. So what happens is that as a result, students are often told not to write in first person. And that can create an issue for certain prompts. So I just want to point out something to you. If you don't already have a copy of the document issued by the Ministry of Education called Frequently Asked Questions about report writing, please get a copy. That document will answer a lot of the questions that you have about report writing. If you still have a lot of questions that you're wondering, okay, can I do this? How are you supposed to do that? And those kinds of things. Um, then that's what I recommend. Review that and see how things go, right? In that document, question 11 is, can students use the first person in their reports? And this is what they, you know what, I should just share this screen while I'm at it. Frequently asked questions. All right, here we go. And I probably need to make it a little bigger so you could see it properly. A little too big. All right, so there we go. So this is what it says. Can students use the first person in their reports? And this is the ministry's response. The report rubric allocates no marks for first or third person, neither is there any penalty for the use of one or the other. Right? That is a line that I'd really like you to pay attention to. There is no penalty, right? Students should be advised to pay attention to this specific report task. And this is the other really important aspect of this response. You see, the thing is, whether a student responds in first or third depends on what the prompt is asking. So you really do need to make sure, and we've covered this before, but I know that there's still this nagging question for some students. And how do you know whether to answer first or third? Here's the thing. Whatever report you're writing on, in order for a student to be able to write a report, the kinds that they have to do for SEA, they had to have been present when the situation occurred. So whether they were just observing or whether they were a participant, they had to actually be there. So everything that they write technically is something that they saw, they observed, they heard, they were there present when this thing happened. So technically, you can write every report from first person because you were there. The issue comes in with how you use that first person and whether or not it's necessary. And so the thing is, if you were not a participant in the report, then first person is not necessary. And remember, reports are all about being precise and relevant and carefully selecting the information. If it is that all you did was to like be on the side and see what happened, you didn't, run and call, you weren't a participant at all, then it's not necessary to include yourself. And to save yourself a lot of headache, don't include yourself. So the response goes on to give an example of a prompt that you absolutely must include yourself, because in this one you are the class prefect and um you your class participated in this competition. Being in the class, it means you participated in the competition, and so therefore you have to include yourself. You would have done certain things in that situation that would need to be reported on, so you were a participant. And so when I um share information about, analyzing the prompts and deciding what to write on, I always tell my students, are you participating or are you an observer? If you are just an observer, don't include yourself. But if you are a participant, include yourself. And so students would know by now how to include themselves, but the idea is that you get to choose. Because watch this. See this last line here? Formal reports are usually written in the third person for objectivity and distancing of what is written. Now, what that means is that, remember, a report is meant to not include emotions, not include feelings, and so on of the writer, because you want to have an objective, like like it says, as a distancing, a separation between the person writing and what actually happened. When you're involved, it's not so easy to do that, but students are taught how to do it effectively once they're involved, not to include their feelings and so on. When you are not involved, if you include yourself, it can actually come across very much like a story when you are putting the ideas together. So it affects the way students write. And so we do really need to be careful. So the idea is that your default position should be not to include yourself. That's when you read a report, your default, I'm writing this report, not including myself. However, if the prompt says you are a participant, then you must include yourself. So I think that's the best way to really, touch on addressing that issue of, whether you are including yourself or not. As a default, your first option, I am not in this report. But if you check the prompt and the prompt says you participated in, for example, I think the 2019 SEA past paper prompt said, one of the prompts was you attended a function in which you received an award. Write a report about the function for your principal. Now, in a case like that, you have to include yourself because you were the one who received the reward and the award, sorry, for whatever you did. And so it is important that you recognize when a prompt asks you, you know, are you involved or not? Have that question as part of your preparation and prompt analysis. Hi, good morning. Um, thank you for joining. So yes, I needed to get that, off my mind. And there's something else with narratives that I need to share with you, but I'll deal with that when I do the narratives. So what happened, even at this stage, and I tell you, I've been telling this to my students since September last year, and students are still struggling with it. Why? Because there's a lot happening and there's a lot that they have to pay attention to. So if they, forget something or they misinterpret something at this point, they do have a lot on their minds. So the best thing to do is to do the revision, do the recap, and then practice to make sure you have that reinforcement. And so while it is absolutely necessary for students to practice every week, do some writing every day, whether it's a report or a narrative, because that's how our schedule is. We have 3 days reports, 3 days narratives, and 1 day relax. However, your schedule is, remember that for students to keep improving, we have to keep checking their work and giving them the feedback. And so they have to actually have a plan on what it is they're practicing. So it's not just a matter of, okay, write a report this week and we will read it, and then you just write another one and read it and get a grade, write another one, read it and get a grade. You really do have to systematically work on certain things. So we are working on a step by step. So we did paragraphs 2 and 3 last week in the reports. Prior to that, we did the paragraph one, which is the introduction. Today, we're doing paragraphs four and five. And then next week, we're going to be revisiting certain things. So there has to be a systematic focus and gradual development and reinforcement as you go, but you cannot look at everything at once. That will be overwhelming to students. So you really want to, you know, pick a topic and focus on that. And so today's topic for reports has to do with the ending of the report and how you put the paragraphs 4 and 5 together. Now, remember the paragraphs 4 and 5, we're working with a 5 paragraph structure, and students absolutely need to memorize this 5 paragraph structure. If your students don't know the 5 paragraph structure and you're working with 5 paragraphs, just back it up, give them a quiz on it, check in with them every week. So every week, quiz them on this 5 paragraph structure. Because I'll tell you something, even with my students, every single session that we have, I remind them about the 3 sentence format for reports, introductions, and I remind them about the 5 paragraph structure. And when I have one on one with my group students, some of them, I ask them, okay, what is the 3 sentence format? They remember sentence one and they don't remember the other two. I ask them, what's the 5 paragraph format? They remember the introduction, kind of, and then they don't remember the rest of it. You know, they know paragraph three, main point, but they can't tell you exactly what to put in the two and four and five. And I know part of that is because of the fact that I'm not with them every day. I'm not with them 5 days a week when they do their writing at school and so on. And quite often, teachers don't reinforce this. And so, whatever number of paragraphs you have decided on, create a template so that the student would know what to put in each paragraph and then reinforce that, double check it. Before you do your practice, remember we're working with 3 times a week for the reports, spend 5 minutes on what goes into paragraph one, what goes into each of the other paragraphs. Because here's the thing, if they have to stop and think about what kind of information to put in each paragraph, that's going to cause a delay in them writing, and they're likely to mix things up a little bit. Reports are all about structure. And because of that, what we want is to have students being very, very clear on what that structure is. Why? Because that structure is what helps you get the formal tone. If you mix things up and you have information out of sequence, or even put things in the introduction that should be in paragraph two and things in paragraph two that should be in paragraph three, that is going to throw off the structure. And when students do that, their writing also tends to be a little bit less formal because they're not following that rigid structure. And so, whatever structure you decide on, make sure your student can tell you off the top of their heads without your student head. Yeah, I listen to myself sometimes. Um, without having to look in their book, without having to double check. You want that memorized. So you do want to check in with that often, right? Because that makes a difference. And when once they have that memorized, they can look at a prompt and decide what is the main focus of this report. So, for example, there's a trend in the prompts to have, well, I don't want to call it a trick question, but there is usually, and when I say usually, I mean I'm talking about we only have 2019 and 2022 to work with in terms of past papers, but both of them had a situation where In one case, you were a participant in a competition and then you won a prize and you're attending the function. And because of that, we have competition and then function, which is an event, and students had to decide what are you reporting on, the competition or the function. Well, the report clearly says write a report on the function. So you're not writing on the competition. So you're writing an event report. And so if you know what goes into the paragraphs of an event report, you know what information that you have to think about and format. But the prompt is not always going to tell you do this or that, write about competition, write about um, the event. The prompt says function, and some students didn't know what the word function meant. And so they wrote more about the competition, but that wasn't the issue of the report. And so a student asked me once, Miss, how do you handle an injury during a field trip? So I asked him, what do you mean by that? Well, how do I write a report on an injury during a field trip? So I asked him, I said, okay, what's the focus of the report? Well, miss, the prompt said, write a report about the injury. I said, well, okay, you're not writing about an injury during a field trip, you're writing about an injury. And the context simply happens to be a field trip. So separating that means that you are not focusing on the field trip, you are focusing on the injury. And so being able to make that distinction would help students really zero in on what they are writing on. And so when that happens, their paragraphs 4 and 5, when they know what to include in that paragraph 4 and 5, they're going to be able to respond more effectively. And so identifying what the focus of the report is, that's your number one priority before you start planning and before you start writing. Because what happens in that paragraph 3, which is the main focus, that is going to heavily influence what happens in paragraphs 4 and 5. And by that, what I mean is your paragraph 4 is the immediate reaction to whatever happened in paragraph 3. So if you get your paragraph 3 slightly off, your paragraph 4 is also going to be slightly off. So really do focus on getting the student to understand how to isolate and identify the main aspect of the report, and everything else is hinged on that, right? So work with identifying, is it an incident, is it an accident, and all those kinds of things. And then when you get that right, paragraph 4, immediate reaction. So here's how you break down those immediate reactions. If it is a competition, the immediate reaction would be, what are the results? So who got the most goals if it's a football match? Who made the most runs if it's cricket? Who got the most words spelled correctly if it's a spelling bee? Who did the best poster if it's a poster competition? Identifying the winners, and we want to do at least first, second, third. So you're identifying these three, and you can also say how the judges were able to identify these three. So they were judged on these criteria, and this person made, 75 points out of the 100, and so they came in third. This other one got 82 out of the 100, and this one came in second. This other person got 91 out of the 100, and that's why they placed first. That's what you're putting in if it's a competition. If it's an incident or an accident, how do people react to the incident and the accident? Somebody is going to go call a teacher. Somebody might call an ambulance. Somebody might administer first aid, remove things, those sort of issues. How do people react immediately? And if it's an event, that would be the end of the presentation. Usually there's some sort of question and answer kind of period. That's what's going to happen there. How do people respond to the situation? That's your paragraph 4. And then paragraph 5. Paragraph 5, there's, I guess, a choice with the paragraph 5, because how do you get the information for paragraph 5 depends on the prompt, of course, and depends on how you put yourself into the prompt or not. How do you get the details? I've seen students talk about things where, you know, what principals told parents and how parents reacted and so on. And all of that, you ask yourself, okay, how did you get that detail? Where were you when this conversation was happening? Because remember, all reports are on situations that characters, the participants, sorry, would have been present to observe or to hear. We're not writing second-hand reports in terms of, Miss told me this, so I'm telling you, or my friend told me this, so I'm telling you. We're not writing second-hand reports. We're writing first-hand reports where a student is present. I was there, this is what I heard. I was there, this is what I saw. I was there, this is what I observed. I was there, this is what I know. And so, were you there when the principal was talking to the parents and giving out punishments and all these things? Were you there in the ambulance when the paramedics are saying whatever to parents? Were you there at the hospital? Were you there in the room when when the principal or whoever, vice principal, teachers were dishing out punishments? Were you there? If you were not there, end your report on what you observed, full stop. So sometimes you might get just 4 paragraphs. If you cannot think of a way that you were able to come by this information, 4 paragraphs. End it there. That's perfectly fine because that's all you were privileged to observe. However, there's something that I noticed in one of the in the both SEA prompts, years, so 2019, 2022, with event reports, and field trips, which is an activity. They ask something about what was learned. And so that is what you would put in paragraph 5, because paragraph 4, even if it's at the end of the trip and whatnot, we're not yet talking about what was learned, because what was learned means the trip is finished. And, we're not still talking with the tour guide or anything. The trip is finished, and now we're reflecting on what we learned. We're not, if it's an event, the presentation is finished, and now we're reflecting on what we learned, and then we're going into saying thank you. So when it comes to an event and an activity, your paragraph 5 would most likely include what was learned and vote of thanks. Vote of thanks are also given in competitions. You can have a statement from the judge, or, thanking everybody, or maybe a statement from the sponsor, and so on. You can have that as part of competitions, events, vote of thanks, activities, vote of thanks. incidents and accidents generally would have punishment, right? So, um, or I guess so. Incident will have punishment. If it's an accident, maybe no punishment, but something would change. So, if somebody was running in the corridor and they slipped and fell, then we have a new rule: no running in the corridor from this point. Things like that. So that would go into the paragraph 5. And with this lesson learned kind of idea that is required for the paragraph 5 with the activities and the events and so on, be very careful how that is presented, right? Be very careful because you don't want the student to write, I learned such and such. Because remember, we just looked at that first person, third person. And if you are not including yourself, you absolutely cannot say, I learned. So, how do you present that information? Well, I've been saying this over and over: reported speech. Make sure your students know how to use reported speech. And when you're presenting lessons learned in, in a report, like for a function, um, an event, like medical professional comes to your school, write about what you learned. Well, but they didn't say you, they said what was learned. So that's objective. They don't want you included in that. So here's what you do. At the end of the presentation, students returned to their classes and the teacher asked the class to identify three things that they learned. And Jimmy raised his hand and said that he learned, well, of course, indicated whatever word you want to use, and that's how you do it. Or Jimmy raised his hand and said one thing, Sahara raised her hand and said something else, and George said what he learned, and you have your three things, and that's how you end. So you're not including yourself, well, I learned that such and such and such. No, you want it done in a reported speech, and the best way to do it is to have other students raise their hand and give what they learned. And you could maybe just do one or two. You don't have to do three because then that's going to get it really long. But at least one other student raising their hand and saying these things, right? So that's how you do it in the end of the report for your paragraph 5 when the question is what was learned. So what was learned comes in paragraph 5 because paragraph 4 would be the wrapping up and questions and answers, which means in the presentation, somebody's going to raise their hand and ask a question, and then the presenter is going to respond to the question. That is not necessarily what was learned. That's a discussion at the end of the presentation. And then at the end in paragraph 5, that's when you identify what goes there, lesson learned. So if you want to do the review of all the different paragraphs, you're still revising and you're double checking and so on, then what I recommend is you go back to the um, previous episodes that I did. I have that information up? No, I don't have it directly, but you could scan through the previous episodes to get that. In fact, I outlined it in the last session. So if you want to know the exact episodes that I covered, competition reports, activity reports, etc., then go to the last session, first part of it. I gave you exactly what episode to go to in order to review that, right? So you can get all that information. And so if you are not sure yet about what you're doing this week, here's what you're doing. Remember, we have three sessions: two 30-minute sessions and one 1 hour session. That's the recommendation. So, for the first 30-minute session, you're taking that 5 minutes to review five paragraph structure, what goes into the five paragraph structure, an extra minute to review what goes into the introduction, because that is something that, above all else, they must have that clear so that they can get the structure that they need and therefore the formal tone. So that's first thing that you do, first 5, 6 minutes of your 30 minutes, right? And then what you're going to do is to look at the kind of information that goes into paragraph 4 and 5 for each type of report. And we are working with 5 natural disasters. That's a sixth one. I included it in my booklets, but to be honest, I do not think a report on a natural disaster will ever come. However, it's something that students need to know just in case, right? Because I cannot presume to dictate and say what CSEC is thinking. I'm only going on the last two, which is 2019 and 2022. I keep repeating that so that you would know. If you don't already have those prompts and a copy of it, you need to get it. You can find it on the ministry's website. Primary school resources, you will get from 2020. I don't think the 2019 one is there, but if you want a copy of the 2019, message me and I can give you a copy. It's on my website, under resources. Well, actually, no, if you go to the SEA, message me and I'll put up the link. It's in SEA Peacefield as well. And so make sure your students know what generally will go into reports for 4 and 5 for each type of report. So they're creating a kind of template. This is what the kind of information you put. Session 2, your next 30-minute session. Again, we begin with report structure and report introduction in particular. Make sure they're very clear. And then you go into giving them prompts and having them plot out or plan out what goes into 4 and 5 for a specific prompt. And so that process begins with having them identify what is the main part of that prompt that goes into paragraph 3, and then outlining specific details that would go into paragraphs 4 and 5 for that particular prompt that they're working on. So you want them to sort of give you examples then of what's going to go into 4 and 5. And then in your third session, which is an hour, you're giving a prompt. Give them the three they can choose from. You're giving a prompt and you are getting them to write that whole report. Of course, we're still checking everything in the report, but you're particularly interested in that 4 and 5 to see how they're mastering it. They should have already mastered the paragraph 1, because out of all of them, paragraph 1 has a sentence by sentence template. So once they know those 3 sentences, then they can give it. Um, Now, the frequently asked questions, they gave a 2 sentence guideline, more or less. But pretty much what they're saying is that there's a variety of ways that you can write it. My 3 sentence format is simply a recommendation because I think it gives a more formal tone and it gives students something to really just have as a guide. So if you memorize that, then you don't have to worry, what do I put? You know what to put. It's there, right? So that's there. And if by chance you don't already have a copy of that 5 reports document, let me know. You can WhatsApp me at, let me put my number up again for those of you who may not know it, right? Let's see. Yeah, so there's my number, 717-4993. If you don't already have a copy of the 5 reports format, it says 5 reports, but I did include the natural disasters. So technically it's 6, but I'm not changing the name right now. It's five 5 reports challenge. What you're getting in that, you'd get samples to see what those should look like, and you get prompts so that you can choose prompts from each of the different types, create your own page, choosing prompts, different prompts, mix and match them. You could make little modifications to the prompts to make them new because you're practicing a lot. And yeah, have your students review like that. And so in addition to that, of course, those booklets have the three sentence format with a demonstration of what that should look like with each of the types of reports that we're talking about. So you'd have that. So send me a WhatsApp or you could send me a message on Messenger and Facebook, and I'd let you know. Process is simple. Send the money. Once I verify I've received it, I send the booklets, they're digital. So depending on the bank you're sending it from, you get it within like two days or so. Right? And so you can, work on it from then if you don't already have a copy. If you already have a copy, what you're doing is you're going through the prompts, selecting few that you could practice with, and then you're creating your own three prompt document for your child to work with as they practice, right? So I think that is what I wanted to share with you for the reports. Now let's move on to the narratives. To move on to the narratives, I want to show you something. I shared this many times before, but I'm going to share it again because I realize it's not something that many people often think about. And so when you're thinking about transitions in a report, this is something to pay attention to. Oh boy, I think my internet is probably running a bit slow today. Okay, so oh, I almost stopped sharing when it came up to try again. But yeah, so when it comes to transitions and paragraphing in a report, I hear students talking about, Miss, I write 5 paragraphs. I said reports, I meant narratives. I hear students talking about, Miss, I write 5 paragraphs for my story, and I write 3 paragraphs. And while it is, um, the point is paragraphing in a story is really how you help readers with transitioning from idea to idea and transitioning Oh, okay, let me back up then. Share screen again. Maybe, okay, let me just quickly share this and then I'll take it back off. I think it's the sharing screen. A little bit of trouble. So I'm just going to share it again so that you could see it and then I'll take it back down when it comes up. So the what I'm talking about with transitions in narratives, I want to share three things. So the first is that how you arrange your paragraphs that helps with transitions in a narrative. And so when you're talking about transitions in a narrative, transition words and phrases. And so you really do have to consider, okay, so this is working. Let me just stop share. You'd have to okay, let me be quick. So three things with narrative transitions, right? So one, narrative transitions, use your paragraphs. So you don't have to stick to 5 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs or, six paragraphs. Paragraphing is how you show transition. A new paragraph, which you could probably go back to the video and the recording, I'll share. It's shared in the that graphic I showed you. It's shared already in SEA Peacefield. So you could look at narrative paragraphs. If you do a search, you can find that there. Okay, so I've said the first thing like 3 times already. Let's move on to point two. Um, with narrative transitions, you want to focus on the reactions of the character, right? So, how your character reacts to things that can help with the um, transition. And when I say that, I mean like, are things abrupt and shocking to the character? Are they um, like emotionally responding to something that already happened and so on? And that allows for transitions. And so you want to, I guess, show emotional changes and that you can use that for the transition. And the third thing has to do with movement and like physical movement of the character. So, like if the character is moving from one location to another, you describe that movement and that helps transition. So, if you're going from school to home, you can describe walking out the door or entering the classroom. You don't have to give all the details, but some sort of movement can help with making the transition. And then you're using words that help with showing readers, because it's really all about showing readers the transition. And so you're looking at, let's see, the paragraphing, the emotional changes with the character, physical movement of the character, and I'll add a fourth one because it really kind of affects the others. You're also looking at the introduction of something into the scene. Now, that is related to paragraphing, it's related to the emotional reactions, it's related to the movement. And so what that is like when you introduce a conflict, that's the point of transition. When you show the character's reaction to the conflict, that's a point of transition. When you have a character moving from one place to another, that's a point of transition. When you start, whatever causes you to start a new paragraph, that is also a point of transition. And so you want to use words that show the mood in those positions and in those situations. So when you're introducing a conflict, you can say things like suddenly. When you're introducing the character's reaction, you could say immediately, after, or, just straight up state it, um, and describe the emotions happening. And I'll tell you a tip that I tell my students, and I've found that it works once they practice it and they follow through with it. It really makes a difference. I love the use of personification when it comes to describing emotions. And so you want to use personification, personify the emotion, and have the emotion do something. And well, when I say do something, like within the character. Yeah. So, fear can grip your heart, excitement can make you dance. And so, really explore that idea. Now, I do that with my students and we practice and I show them little tips and, we expand on that. So you can try it out as well and see how that works. But I've found that for students who don't know how to include emotion and to describe emotion, giving them a specific strategy like using personification, that can help. And with the examples, if you want to get examples of those kinds of things, you can check the sample stories that I have in my the 7 stories challenge. So just like with the 5 reports, I have one for narratives. The 7 stories challenge, you can check through that and see in the sample stories how you can how those kinds of things are done, and you can really look at the transitions and the paragraphing. Dialogue affects paragraphing as well because you want to start new speakers in new lines. So we don't want, child talking, mommy talking, daddy talking, sister talking, everybody in one paragraph. It's a little confusing for readers to figure out, who is speaking when it's done like that. So definitely pay attention to the dialogue. Now we looked at that last week, so your child should already be familiar with those kinds of things with dialogue. So this week, following from that, we're adding also more focus on paragraphing, more focus on transitions. So how do you move from one point to another? Emotional response, introduce the conflict, um, move from one paragraph to another, uh, you know, follow along with the mood and the action, and so on. So use words that represent those things, and this is something that you need to practice. So this week for the narratives, that's what you're practicing. You're looking at first session, your first 30-minute session. You're looking at a reminder of what mood is, the words that create mood in a story, and then you're looking at paragraphing, going back to that tip top paragraphing structure, and you're looking at how the transitions happen in stories. So you do some reading, get some sample stories. So if you have the booklet, you're reviewing those stories again. If you want some new stories to work with, I have available, I have three more in another package, and that one is just $50. And so send me a message. So for those of you who are interested in getting the samples, send me a message, WhatsApp me on 717-4993, and I'll send you, the banking information, a breakdown of what actually the samples include, and so on. So if you already have the seven stories and you've been using those over and over and you want a fresh set of stories, I have only three at the moment, but they're also packaged with three sample reports, and that one is $50. The seven stories is 145 because there's seven stories, there's some breakdown, um, transitions, you can see them in the samples, a little bit on description, and there's some other things with that because that's like a complete package that you can do. Every 3 days you do a booklet, every week you do a booklet, those kinds of things. That one comes with prompts and writing and all of that. That's like a full package, like a text, but it's digital. And so that one is 145. The other one is just straight up samples and a guideline. And so that one is just $50, but you get three new reports, three new narratives in that one. And so the best way to get any of my resources, because I haven't actually put it up on the website yet, it should have gone up this weekend, but that didn't quite work out. So I'm getting my webmaster to actually deal with that. Um, but so just WhatsApp me and I'll send you the details and we can work from there. So the seven stories is 145, and the new sample booklet with three reports, three narratives, that one is $50. And so working through with samples, you can actually all these things that I'm discussing and I'm sharing with you, I carefully created each of the samples in a way that it would demonstrate these things so that you could see how it's used, even down to the grammar when we spoke about the past perfect with use of had and to be and all of that. Um, the I made sure that in the stories that are written and in the reports that were written, that all of these little grammatical things and mechanical things like transitions and so on, all of these things are demonstrated so that when you review these stories, you would see how they work particularly, right? So that's the thing with the narratives and narrative transitions. The number one thing to remember, narrative transitions are different from report transitions. So you don't want to say things like prior to or shortly after, and because it really does make the story feel more like a report. You want it to be active and engaging, so that's why using the characters emotions and actions work best, and using transition words that are very emotive. So, like, suddenly brings up a lot of emotion. So, you will use that in a narrative, but not in a report. And so, you want to say, like, so suddenly, all of a sudden, those kinds of things, because you want that impact. You really do want an emotional impact with your transitions. Um, and so it's all written from the main character's perspective, and you're really focusing on how the main character emotionally is responding to things and how it will actually impact on the main character, and those that would be your guide on what kind of words and transitions to use. So I think that's what I can say about transitions. Now, I did actually cover transitions before, and I went through that paragraphing information quite in a lot of detail, the graphic that I was attempting to share. And so you can go back to previous episodes. I'll put it in the chat after this session. I'll go back and I'll put in which episodes are related to what. um, I'll probably just do a document with the episodes list from April so that you could just go back and check that, right? We did have a schedule and we're still working with this particular schedule, but I made some changes along the way, and then when I started adding in the comprehension, there was also that change. So, um, but we've gone into details with a lot of these things before. Because remember, right now we're practicing and reinforcing stuff that we already done. These things should not be new. If they happen to be new, then you might need to spend an extra 30 minutes at another time outside of your 3 sessions to really reinforce these things. So, in your first session, you're looking at the transitions and reviewing paragraphing guidelines for narratives. And then in the second session, you are doing a little bit of practice. How do you transition from here to there? You know, the character, how do you transition from the introduction to the second paragraph? How do you transition from the second paragraph to the third? So in the first session, you were reading, identifying, you know, uh, strategies and phrases, and so that you could use. And then in your second 30-minute session, you're practicing that. And then so finally, in your third session, which is when you're writing a full narrative, you are implementing all those things that you practiced, right? So that's how your narrative session should go this week. You're focusing on paragraphing, grammatical structure of having those varied sentences, which are important, and you're making sure that your transitions, you have the punctuation clear. If you're using an introductory phrase, then you need a comma after it. So you really want to pay attention to the formatting. And so you're getting both some grammar and punctuation while you're working on transitions and sentence structure. So it's one of those multifaceted things. So while you're working on this, you're drawing on previous knowledge from different areas. And that's going to help with the flow of the narrative itself. So let me transition now to the comprehension. And this week in comprehension, we're reviewing nonfiction and graphics. And so I have two things I want to tell you about each of them. So for nonfiction, I want to remind you that there's a wide variety of nonfiction writing. However, the kind of nonfiction passages that students will be presented with is fairly limited. And when I say that, what I mean is the nonfiction passages that students are given for SEA do not include persuasive pieces that try to get students to think a certain way and so on. It's usually the kind that would be informative, where you are presenting information on a particular topic. So they're not going to say, um, things like the using the internet is detrimental. They usually give a sort of balance in the type of reporting that they do, the type of articles that are chosen. And they're really written from the format of, like, articles. Now, of course, if you want to be sure about that and see for yourself, make sure you have a copy of the SEA past papers. You can get the blank ones at the Ministry of Education's website. Like I said, primary school resources. So just go, Ministry of Education. I think it's MOETT. Can't remember the link, but I'll put it in after. You can just do a Google search, Ministry of Education Trinidad, and it'll come up. Um, Go to primary school resources, and you would get past papers there. You would get the math, ELA, and the creative writing from 2020 all the way up to 2023 on the website, the blank ones with the exact format of, putting in candidate number and all those kinds of things so that you can really see how the exam is going to be presented to your child or your students and get them prepared and seeing it in that particular way, right? Um, and take a look specifically at the ELA and look at the comprehension and see how the nonfiction pieces are. I think out of the 5 years from 2019, we have three fiction and two nonfiction, but you would still see, or is it three? Either way, I can't remember right now, but you would get to see the kinds of passages that are presented to students. And that's something that you want to know. What would it look like? Not the SEA exam is specifically geared to a certain age group and to a certain type of nonfiction. So you really want to know. So it's not just nonfiction, it is curated in a particular way. So get a copy of the past papers and check the ones that have nonfiction and see how they work. If you want to get a copy of the answers for those, then send me a WhatsApp message. I can get you those as well. I have from 2019 to 2023 in a package, both complete and sorted according to section, so that you can go directly to the comprehension passage or directly to poetry if you want and see what it looks like over the time. What I've found is that there are some patterns. Once you study them, you'd notice there are some patterns in the way the comprehension is presented, the way the questions are written, and so on. So that's something that you'd really want to look into. You can do that. Just go to the ministry site, download them, take a look at it. I don't know if 2019 is there, but I have a copy of the blank 2019. And of course, if you're getting the answers, you're getting the responses from 2019 to 2023. That one cost about 150. And so send me a WhatsApp message if you're interested in any of these. You can actually go to my website, woodcoach.com. Maybe I should put that up here as well. Yeah, so I'll put the website and you're going to resources. So when you get to the website, you'd go to the top tabs and you'd see resources, click on those, and you would see what's available there. So you can buy it straight off the website or um, send me a message on WhatsApp, and that would be the best way to contact me. All right. So I think that's about it. We had quite a few glitches today. I think I still covered everything I wanted to cover. If you have any questions whatsoever on reports or narratives, feel free to WhatsApp me or message me. Send me a message on Messenger as well. Ask your questions because if I am available at the time I see the message, I'll respond and give you direct response, but at the very least, the next session, I'm going to answer those questions there so that you would get the information either way to answer your questions and know how it is you can really best support your child or children going toward SEA 2024. Thank you so much for those of you, excuse me, for those of you who were able to stick it through all the glitches and the me getting bumped off of my own live. Imagine that. Right? Um, I really do appreciate the fact that you stuck around and you got the information. Let me know how helpful it was, and by all means, like and subscribe on YouTube so that you can, when another one comes up, you can get the notification. But I'm here every week until SEA, so I would be here up until um, I think it would be the 19th. Yeah, the 19th is the last Tuesday before SEA because SEA is 2020 in 2024. What is it? March 21st. Yep. So I'll be here answering questions, giving you support, and most certainly check through SEA Peacefield to get as much information as you can and support. There's a ton of information on math and lots of questions answered there when it comes to preparation for math. So I cover the creative writing, but yeah, you would get the math in SEA Peacefield. So, oh, hi Tracy, thank you so much for saying that. I know I say this all the time, and it's just because it's just me here. And even though I see the numbers, people are paying attention. It helps me to know that what I'm doing is really helping you and giving you the tools that you need to support your child. So thank you very much, Arling, and for sticking around through all the drama that we had today. So have a wonderful rest of today, and I look forward to seeing you guys again same time next week. Well, actually, I'll be on time next week. That's the plan. All right. Thank you so much, and take care. Have a good one. Bye bye.